Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. We're getting closer and closer to college all-star season as the draft process ramps up here with college football playoffs still ongoing, and as we get into the all-star games. One of those games is, of course, the East-West Shrine Game. And today I've got Owen Reise, Assistant Director of College Scouting for the Shrine Game, as a guest, and we'll get into some of the Shrine Game participants. So, Owen, thank you so much for hopping on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And I think the last time you and I got together, I think we were sitting at a table watching John Ledyard eat.
Yeah, those Brazilian steakhouse in Indianapolis has hopefully not made any money off of us. And yeah, and John got the better of him that night for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get into the Shrine Game, and that's coming up, sooner rather than later. I think we're 2 weeks out. I think the game itself is on January 30th.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
And
Yep.
you guys,
Players will report on the 23rd. So yeah, it's coming right up here.
right. And that's you guys, there's what, four full days of practice for these guys?
Yep. Yeah. So there'll be 4 days of practice. They get a day off, which it kind of turns into like a media day, and that's the
Mhm.
day where the players have the opportunity to play with the Shriners' children, and they do the Hall of Fame inductions. This year, it's Eddie George and Andrew Whitworth are the two players getting inducted in the Shrine Bowl Hall of Fame, so they'll be there, and then the next day, that Thursday, is the game itself.
And those, for the scouts and everybody that attends, those are mostly fully padded practices.
Yeah, generally the first three.
Mhm.
Sometimes they'll go a little lighter on that last day just to make sure there isn't any unneeded attrition heading into
Mhm.
the game. But yeah, for the most part, those first three practices are usually pretty pedal to the metal. And so that for the scouts, as well as we do have 3 full days of interviews as well. The total of 10 hours of availability for the players with the teams. Those are the two major pieces of value that the scouts get out of the Shrine Bowl.
And this is a big one for you guys. It's a 100th anniversary of this game. It's been around for just a little while. You guys, is anything special, anything significant, that you guys are doing around the 100th anniversary?
As far as the actual Shriners itself, I'm not always as privy to that. They are always out in full force for the game. I don't know about that. I guess I can tell you for the game itself, it'll be in AT&T Stadium, which is always a fun deal. And so this is my fourth year with the Shrine Bowl, and the first 2 years we were in Las Vegas, and after that first 2 years, there was an opt out in the contract, and Frisco made it very clear that they wanted us there. And so it's been our second year back there, but an awesome opportunity for us to be in AT&T Stadium. Awesome opportunity for the players, obviously, and the fans of football, and the entirety of the game itself is a big fundraiser for obviously the Shriners Children's Hospital. So an awesome opportunity for us, and yeah, the 100th year, which is pretty remarkable. Again, only my fourth year with the game, so it's pretty special to be able to be a part of such a milestone year for the game.
And so let's start talking about some of the players and some of some of the guys that might be of interest to the New York Giants. And n- you know, I hope you don't take offense to this, but a lot of times people think of, in this day and age, they think of the Shrine Game as sort of secondary to the Senior Bowl. And I know that in recent years there's been a lot of competition between the two. I'm aware of that, but I'm looking at the roster for this year. I'm looking at the Shrine Game roster for this year, and how big is it for the Shrine Game? You guys landed Shedeur Sanders as one of the players in your roster, and that's a huge name. Obviously, the guy who might go number one overall. Um, before we even talk about him as a prospect, just how big is it for the game itself, to land the guy who might go number one overall?
For sure. I think, and I don't take offense to that. I think for the most part, I think if you talk to um, the average football fan, or anyone at least that's in it enough to be aware of the All Star games, I think that's probably the general consensus or the general perception. And it's been a fun 4 years for us here. Obviously, Eric Galco, my boss, has kind of been the one spearheading that when he got the job. And why be the best, second best anything, right? And so
Right.
it's been a big effort and a big attempt to try to close that gap, if not eventually supersede, right? And so a couple years ago, we had Zay Flowers at the game, which was our first round pick in over a decade, which was a huge get for us. And last year we had 57 draft picks overall, which is the most we had ever had at the Shrine Bowl. And so, yeah, obviously landing Shedeur this year is a huge deal, and it's an awesome opportunity for him and for us as well. Obviously, with like you said, one of the two guys, probably one of the two quarterbacks that are really in contention for that top overall pick. It's a huge deal for not only for the game, but I think the big thing is for the players, right? I think that obviously the players are grateful for an opportunity in an All Star game, but I think it makes them perk up a little bit. All of a sudden, a guy that they obviously one of their peers and someone who's very well known and has drawn a lot of attention to himself. Obviously, his dad helps with that as well. But someone who's warranted a lot of positive attention, and all of a sudden, well, he shows up somewhere else. And he's like, whoa, you kind of take notice of that and say, well, what's the Shrine Bowl doing? Well, how are they different? Maybe I need to learn a little bit more, right? Now, not altogether different than in college recruiting, right? Or at least back when it used to be recruiting, right? But all of a sudden, Jadeveon Clowney and Marcus Lattimore go to South Carolina, and all of a sudden, everyone's like, "Whoa, like what's going on there?" Right? And it just takes one sometimes, and so we're very blessed to have Shedeur at the game, and yeah, it's a big, credit to Eric Galco for that. It's a big win for us. Like I said, not only in perception, but also just for attention for the game and a great opportunity for Shedeur as well. I think whichever game the players go to, obviously, is a huge opportunity for them. But I credit Shedeur for having the courage maybe or the willingness and the ambition to go kind of spearhead this. And he's like, no, I'm going to go be the first big guy, first big quarterback at the Shrine Bowl.
So what can he for him, guy that, as we said, might be the number one pick, might be the number two pick, might be the guy that the Giants target. That I think all remains to be seen. But what does he need to show? What is this experience about for him, at least in terms of the NFL scouts, that'll be there, the GMs that'll be there. What does he need to accomplish while he's there?
I think, I mean, and obviously I'm not in an NFL building, right? And I haven't done a lot of the background and all that stuff that those guys have. But I would say I think the biggest thing is it's a huge opportunity for Shedeur to kind of put on full display for all 32 teams in attendance at one time. That he kind of has the opportunity to kind of be whatever he wants to be, right? I think, and to if there's any questions or any concerns about his professionalism or whatever the case with that may be, I think this is a perfect opportunity for him to come and quell those on field. I think it's an opportunity for him to just, again, be in a fairly intimate setting with all of these scouts. And, if they have any arm strength concerns, or which I don't think is the case, right? But just to see it in person, I think a lot of times holds a lot of weight, and get to see how he interacts with his teammates, right? How does he act as a leader? In the interview setting as well, I think it's a huge opportunity for him to make an impression, right? The Giants, the last 2 years, Joe Shane has been in that interview room, right, working with the Giants. And so if he has the opportunity to himself go face to face with Shedeur Sanders, I think that's a huge opportunity for Shedeur and something that he can capitalize on and take advantage of. I think that's, this game has the potential to be as beneficial to him as he allows it to be, I would say, which, obviously puts the onus on him a little bit. But again, it's his opportunity to interact with these high level NFL personnel guys and executives, and learn from NFL coaching and interact with potential future NFL teammates. And he's got a couple of college teammates there as well for It'd be a good opportunity for him to just have some familiarity and support. But I think it's a huge opportunity for Shedeur to kind of put a stamp, and we don't know what the status is of the rest of the quarterbacks yet. Obviously, Cam Ward is still out there. That other in contention quarterback hasn't committed to a game yet, and so right now Shedeur is kind of leading the charge on that, and I think it's a good opportunity for him to, I don't know. Obviously, I don't want to look into it too much, right? But he has an opportunity to separate himself and differentiate himself a bit in that process. I think it's a huge opportunity for him, and something that we're looking forward to having him in Frisco at the game, and it's a huge opportunity for him as well.
So let's talk a little bit about a couple of the other quarterbacks that are in the game. I get a lot of questions about Kyle McCord, the former Ohio State quarterback, went to Syracuse this past year, had a really good year. Um, what at this point, what's your understanding, or if it's not too early for you to have one, what's your understanding of what the NFL thinks of McCord?
Yeah, I think, and we'll talk about from what I understand, we'll talk about this in a little bit, right? But I think a big deal with him is that it's been a huge positive for NFL teams from what the feedback that we've gotten, that you see a quarterback that obviously the season didn't end how they wanted it to in Ohio State, and I'm sure that he would be the first to tell you that they didn't live up to whatever expectations that probably he and the fans had, and has taken the opportunity to transfer to Syracuse and honestly remedy a lot of the issues that he had at Ohio State. Right, when he was with the Buckeyes, he was struggled against pressure, right? Struggled when under pressure, the decision making, and that's something that was pretty markedly improved this year at Syracuse, and the ability to kind of not succumb to the perception, right? All of a sudden, everyone thinks that he was kind of ran out of Ohio State. Well, he showed up in a new place and threw for over 5,000 yards and 34 touchdowns, and led the Syracuse the team to a great season. And I think that's something that you see a player that's at a big time, and we've seen a lot of these, right? And with whether it's Caleb Williams or even Dylan Gabriel, Bo Nix, a lot of these guys, Michael Penix, who have been at a bigger spot and transferred, right? And that's can sometimes either be a good or bad thing. I think Kyle's done a great job spinning that into a positive, right? And allowing himself to grow from that Ohio State experience and let that be a benefit later in his career, as opposed to just being that's the old Ohio State guy. Like, well, no,
Mhm.
that's the Syracuse guy, Kyle.
Right.
So I think he's done a great job with that, and just as far as navigating that process. Now he's had two different coaching staffs to be under, and more ability to learn and different teammates, and kind of all things that help him prepare for the NFL, right? When the NFL, your teammates change every year, right? It's a constant cycle, whether it's free agents or the draft or whatever it is. And his ability to assimilate and quickly learn and gain the respect of that locker room is a huge deal. And, something that he did a great job of this year. We're excited to have him.
You you look at him as a legitimate, maybe day two, kind of quarterback at this point, or is it early for that?
It might be a little early. I don't know. I mean, depending on, it only takes one, right? I think that,
Right.
he comes out and has a great week. I don't think late day two is out of the picture. It's being realistic from the way this quarterback class looks to be shaping up. It wouldn't really surprise me if this year was altogether different than last year, as far as you saw, the first rounders are the first rounders, and then there's kind of everyone else. I don't say that Kyle McCord's not going to go until the fifth round. That's not my, that's not my intent. But I think he's got a good opportunity to kind of cement himself as the top of that next tier in a year where I think it is very whatever kind of flavor you want out of your guys, right? Are you looking for a bigger pocket passer? Are you looking for a more mobile guy? And depending on what the teams are looking for, McCord has the physical tools to translate into that, and I think could be one of those guys where honestly he could be like a Kirk Cousins, right? The first pick of day three wouldn't surprise me a ton, and depending on who that team is and what they're looking to do. But I think that third, fourth round range seems right for McCord after this year, and again can kind of set himself up to be in that next tier of quarterbacks, which again the amount of guys we've seen go back to school, right? It all bodes better and better for him and the other quarterbacks in the class.
And the other quarterback I wanted to ask you about is Curtis Rourke out of Indiana. He's the other really recognizable name that's in your quarterback room that'll be in the Shrine game. Um, where do you see him as an NFL prospect at this point in time?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it was about a week ago. I think we learned he basically played the whole year with a torn ACL, and so I think he'll still be at the game, and he'll obviously only be interviewing, right? Obviously, not physically um, able to go right now, but I think it's a good opportunity for him. He's another one of those guys, right, who transferred to another place and elevated his game, right? He was well known at Ohio and went back to school, and there was talk last year that he may come out and went to Indiana, and I think obviously I think we all agree that was the right move. He's a guy I think that you probably see in the middle of day three, right? He's a bigger guy. He's older prospect. He's a sixth year guy, but he's a um, bigger pocket quarterback with a little bit of athleticism. Um, doesn't have the biggest arm, right? Doesn't have the arm that you think of when you think of a 6'5", 225, 230-pound quarterback, right? But he uses the anticipation and understanding of the offense to be able to maneuver that. And I think he's a solid middle day three pick that you're thinking is a team that wants to come in. Obviously, the medicals will take a second, but someone they want to develop into that second string quarterback initially, and be a guy that maybe potentially never is a starter, but can be a high level number two, to where your entire game plan and the forecast of the next 3 to 4 games doesn't change, right? If your starter has to step out of the game for some
Mhm.
reason, and as we've seen in the NFL this year, right, there are a very few number of effective backup quarterbacks, and otherwise that drop off can be pretty sharp. So the more quality quarterbacks, number twos, they get in the game, and someone with like Rourke with all that experience in college and the different levels as well, I think he's a good candidate for that. And obviously being an older guy, but with the health stuff can kind of be slow rolled into camp and continue to learn and use that. He's a guy who's played a ton of football, so I don't know if obviously all the rookies need reps in the NFL, but not a guy who this is probably a apples to oranges example, but someone like Anthony Richardson, right, who had very little college experience and was really selected as a huge investment based off of his physical traits, right? Every single rep and every second of NFL teaching and learning was going to be vital to his success. I don't say that Curtis Rourke's won't be, but I don't think that learning curve will be nearly as steep, and I think he'll be a bit more able to just kind of absorb that NFL coaching and learning immediately, and then when his knee is ready to roll, then he can kind of maybe more quickly assimilate himself into his forecasted role.
Okay, let's talk a little bit, and you've kind of touched on it, in talking about a couple of these quarterbacks. College football is a different world than it was a year ago, than it was the last time the Shrine game was played. Between the the explosion of NIL money, um, and the expanded college football playoff with games still going on as we're doing this. Um, and it's kind of a so let me start here with all of that. How does it change, for someone that's involved in trying to put these rosters together, for these games? How does it change that process? Just you may have guys that are still playing that might not be available. Just how does it change that whole process of identifying kids and getting kids to come and be part of the game?
I think it forces your ability to be flexible, right? I think that's the uh, you know Eric Galko is our boss, right? But Shane Coughlin is our director of scouting, and Riley Bymaster and I and others. I don't mean to exclude any others, but do a lot of work, right, to make sure and for lack of a better term, right, to have a net, right? You say, okay, well, we want 8 quarterbacks or 6 quarterbacks. You said, okay, well, we need probably like 5 or 6 more, right, in the hopper, ready to roll. And you kind of have to have that ready at almost every single position, um, because of it was, I mean, last year, for example, right, within a week of the game, we got an acceptance from Cam Ward because he had declared for the draft, and within a couple of days, right, had obviously gotten contacted by Miami and took that money and went to Miami. In that same stretch, we lost that quarterback but gained Talia Tagovailoa because the NCAA denied his 6th year of eligibility, while a tight end for Miami this year was in his 9th college season. I don't know how any of these rules work. I think the NCAA is making them up as they go and can choose when and which ones they choose and when they do and don't enforce them. But the fact of the matter is it's really challenged us to really be flexible and to really make this a comprehensive um, search, right? I mean, as far as realistically, the other All Star games prior to us do help us quite a bit. The Hula Bowl, the College Gridiron Showcase. We see a lot of kids down at those games. I was just down at CGS this past weekend. Eric Galco and Michael Coe were at the Hula Bowl this past weekend, right? And that's another opportunity for us to kind of see that, obviously they're at another All Star game, right? So clearly they're a step above the average senior player in this class, and
Hmm.
whether it's where they're training or what game they're at, kind of helps us provide us another again, just another piece of that net, right? All of a sudden,
Hmm.
yeah, well, here's 3 or 4 more tackles in case someone goes down, right? Or quarterbacks or injury replacements midweek, and it's a huge deal for that. And those games are a huge deal for us, but it is a truly fluid process from late November, early December until the players step foot in Frisco, Texas on
Hmm.
Thursday the 23rd. There are a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving parts, and all of a sudden, when you think that you think a position set, a player will tweak something in training, right? And they come to the
Hmm.
game and they still interview, but now you're learning when they get there, by the way, I'm actually hurt. I won't be able to practice, but I would like to still interview, which we try to still honor and allow those kids to do that. It's not the kids' fault they got banged up, right? We're not going to punish them and send them home because they're not able to practice. But then all of a sudden, all right, guys, we need another safety. We need another
Hmm.
linebacker. We need another pass rusher. Where who are we looking for? And then depending on which team, so we split our teams up by scheme. And so one team will run an odd front, and the other team will run a four front and zone and gap blocking and and a lot of that stuff. And all of a sudden, you're like, well, we need another nose. Okay, well, we need another
Hmm.
three technique. We need whatever the case may be, and so it really, like, again, it forces you to be fluid and flexible and have a pretty thorough list of guys as a next up. And which is good, right? Doing this job has really truly helped me appreciate the depth of each and every draft class, and when you watch 500 to 600 guys a year, kind of understand and learn well, who's really good enough and where what positions are really strong or not, and what one looks like, and that kind of helps you at the end of the day with that selection process again, right until the last possible second.
So the other piece of this that I'm fascinated by with the college football playoff now, the season is so long. Some of these kids are playing 14, 15, 16, 17 games.
Yeah, it's absurd.
And, the college football season once upon a time was 9 or 10 games. And what I've been thinking about is really twofold. And the part of the process, for you guys and leading up to this draft, these kids are asked to do so many workouts. They're asked to do so many things at the combine. They're asked to go do private workouts, all of those things. And there's so many guys who have been training for weeks now, specifically for combine events, while other guys are still playing games. And you've obviously been out there a little bit talking to some of these guys and all of that. And what I'm wondering about is how is all of this, the expansion of the college football season, how is that going to impact the draft process itself and what these kids are going to be willing to put themselves through physically and how much working out they're going to be willing to do, or are they going to say no, I've put my body through enough and you're just going to have to go to the film?
Well, we've already seen it a little bit, right? And not quite to the elongated season part, right? But someone like Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, right, just didn't do anything. And obviously, when you're arguably the top player in the draft, you have quite a bit more leverage to do things like that. But I do think you're right. There certainly is a toll that these guys that play later in the year have on their body, and we're going to have to see. I think unfortunately, the answer is we're going to have to see, right? Because this is all fairly new for us. In the past, we've had guys that will show up to the game the week after the national championship, or maybe slightly after that, and generally, their bodies are banged up, but they are still kind of in season mode, right? To where they're like, well, okay, it's been another week, like my body can handle a couple more days, right? And so
Mhm.
they've generally done well with that. I think to your prior point, I think that's really where you see the bigger difference is when the kids show up that have been playing more recently. Um, their bodies are still fairly conditioned to it. The kids that have been done since November 30th or December 7th, whatever that last game was, we typically the injuries we see at our game are more soft tissue injuries, right? It's more hamstrings. It's more because they've been training to be a track athlete now for the last month and a half, and they haven't been taking hits, and they aren't conditioning their muscles the same way, and putting them under that type of load, right? Obviously, they're still working out and they're still pushing their bodies, but it's a different thing. They're no longer in quote unquote football shape, not cardiovascularly, but just physically, right? And taking the pounding on your body day after day. And so I think that's where, obviously, if the players do choose to be a part of the All Star games, I think that's uh, almost maybe to their advantage physically. But as obviously they're on the other shoe, right? They're cutting down their time to be training for the combine and what that may be as well. And so a bit of a double-edged sword. Admittedly, I am not a huge fan of almost anything that's going on with college football these days, but certainly something you can't ignore them, right? Whether you like it or not, they're happening, and so you kind of have to kind of roll with the punches with that. We've seen, just I think today we got Dominic Lovett and Xavier Truss from and Ben Urasek from Georgia, right? So those teams, you see some of these schools that the seasons are going longer, and you wait longer and longer to see when those kids will accept those invites, or when they're given the invites by the program, depending on how long their season goes, right? And so um, the teams that have been playing longer, you see a little bit of that. But as far as that, as far as the player standpoint goes, I would almost argue that it helps them as far as physically being ready for the game. But in the long term, it's to be seen. But it's again, it's a great load physically on these kids, and I don't know if it's for the best, but that's not my decision to make. So we got to roll with the punches, and that's the rules that are, it's kind of the cost of doing business, right? It's what you have to deal with, and you can complain about it all you want, but you still have to deal with it and kind of adapt to the situation at hand. So that's kind of what we see. But yes, the longer this goes, I think probably the more prone those kids are to not show up or to be banged up when they get there, and probably do interviews only, which is still to the kids' benefit come the combine, right? I think, not to ramble here, but I think that one of the bigger benefits for these kids coming to the All-Star game, obviously aside from the practices themselves, is kind of lightening their own load in Indy by getting a lot of these background interviews and less formal exchanges with these teams out of the way, so that when they do get to Indianapolis, it kind of lightens their load a little bit, and they're able to more optimize their performance.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, as we look forward to the week of practices and the game and all of that, I'm not at a point where I can ask you questions about specific players outside the quarterbacks, but what I would like to do is just hit two or three positions of interest, uh, and maybe you can just drop two or three names at each position. Guys that maybe Giants fans should pay attention to during Shrine Week and throughout the whole process.
Yeah, sure.
Um, one of the positions that I know is near and dear to your heart is, of course, the offensive line. Um, I know you do work at Wisconsin Platteville as an assistant offensive line coach there. So you know what it looks like.
Yep.
And the Giants, for me, they signed a whole bunch of free agents last year. Their offensive line was improved, but the big hole on the Giants offensive line is that there isn't a pipeline of young talent sitting there developing and getting ready. And for my money, they have to change that this offseason. I would expect If they get a comp pick, they'll have 8 picks. They're going to take at least one, if not 2 offensive linemen somewhere in this draft. They almost have to, because they've got to develop that pipeline. Just give me a couple guys in your game, whether they're guards, tackles, centers, whatever. Give me a couple guys that you really like, that we should know about.
Yeah, we'll do a couple at each here. So, one of the guys that I was really happy we were able to land, and I think is kind of gone under the radar here quite a bit. His name is Brandon Crenshaw Dixon. He's the right tackle from the University of Florida. He was a transfer this year from South Dakota, or excuse me, San Diego State. He was a multi-year starter at San Diego State. So again, you look back at that a couple of years ago, both he and Josh Simmons from Ohio State are going to be 2 guys that were drafted at now out of bigger schools, right? That were both at San Diego State at the same time. He's played right tackle in college, but really, really long, right? Really hits those prototype lengths, and about 6'7" and 315 pounds, able to play with that length quite a bit and use it to his benefit in pass pro, really being able to be patient, right? Due to that length and kind of his ability to recover from that. Another guy I really like is Holland Pierce out of Rutgers. He's a guy who's in the 6'8", 6'7", 330, 340 pound range. But better feet than you'd expect, and a bit more lean. Think more power forward and less refrigerator type of build there. He's a guy that I think has a chance to really do well with some good testing in a good week at the game. At guard, someone I'd like to shout out is Aiden Williams, who actually played left tackle at the University of Minnesota Duluth, a Division II school. Will be playing on the inside for us, and he's a guy that we've gotten some pretty good reviews about from scouts. A couple of years ago, we had Brett Lang, who was a left tackle from Duluth, and unfortunately, an injury during training kind of hampered him, but he was thought to be like a sub 5-second 40 guy. Aiden Williams is another guy who will probably have to play inside due to arm length issues at the next level, but a guy that we're really excited about, as well as Nash Jones. It was a guy who played both left tackle and left guard at Texas State. Again, another small school guy we actually wanted to invite last year and ended up going back to school. So Nash Jones, another guy, I think he's a better athlete than you'd think, especially out of the second level, being able to mirror and kind of cover up those linebackers in the run game. They've done a really good job with that at Texas State the last couple of years. And then inside at center, probably the big one, or the person that'll draw some of the most intrigue, is Thomas Perry from Division III Middlebury in Vermont. So he's a kid who was on Bruce Feldman's Freaks list. He's a guy he's training with Duke Manyweather, which obviously is a formula of success for about any offensive line prospect. But he's a kid who the sky really is the limit for him, because we don't know how good he can be, because, and it's not a knock at Middlebury College, but it was pretty clear he wasn't being overcoached, right? And you can tell he's a big time athlete and a nice player. But just those smaller schools typically don't always have the resources, to have an expansive coaching staff with multiple guys at each position, and they're able to kind of optimize that. So he's a guy, I know he's been down in Texas with Duke since middle of November. And he's been a guy who's I'm really excited to see compete. He's going to play center for us at our game. He was a left guard at Middlebury, but he, and then Marcus Weir as well from Montana State, another guy who has played both tackle and guard at Montana State. Probably projects inside at center, just due to some length and profile limitations. But another guy who's a really solid athlete, really has done a really good job at Montana State. He's a guy who just got done playing in that FCS national championship game against North Dakota State last week. And he's another guy I think has a really good chance to impress, showing the scouts both his football intelligence as well as the ability to seamlessly kind of switch positions and adapt on the fly.
How about let's go to the other side of the ball. Giants have a big fella named Dexter Lawrence, who isn't too bad of a player,
no doubt,
but they don't have a whole lot else. In 2023, they traded away Leonard Williams. After that season, they lost Ashawn Robinson in free agency. They really didn't replace either of those guys. So it was Dexter and a collection of bodies, basically. It's another spot they have to address. Again, just give me maybe not necessarily nose tackle guys, but guys who could play on either side of Dexter.
For sure. The first one I would go to is Sean Martin. He's a defensive tackle from West Virginia. Again, another guy that we actually considered last year before he ended up going back to school. He is the uh, again prototypical odd front defensive end in that 6'5", 6'6" range, about 300 pounds, long arms, not going to provide a ton of twitch in the pass rush, right? But he's a big body who's able to control those offensive tackles with his length and be able to kind of play, whether it's a gap and a half or two gaps, and really kind of allow those linebackers to run around, right? I think that's the thing is that obviously Leonard Williams was a bigger playmaker at those positions, right? But a lot of times those interior defensive linemen and those odd fronts are really there to kind of occupy blockers. Sean Martin's a guy who I think improved his stock by going back to school. And he's a guy that I think almost any 3-4 team in the NFL is going to look at. There just simply aren't that many bodies built like that on the planet. And so those guys are coveted in those schemes. Another guy I'm going to go with was Elijah Roberts from Southern Methodist. He's a kid who was one of the, I think it's like 9 or 10 guys from Miami that transferred to SMU with Rhett Lashley, whether it was immediately or a year after. And last year, Elijah Roberts really popped off and had a big year, and everyone kind of wondered if he would go out. But they said, well, I don't know. He didn't really have a ton of production at Miami. This is kind of a flash in the pan. Went back to school and did it again this year and played really well. And he's a guy that can kind of play up and down the front, whether he's probably more of a three technique type body, that 295-pound range, but again, can play, over the tackle as well. He's a good athlete, not just a space eater inside, and someone that can be pretty multiple and versatile in those fronts and kind of provide a lot of flexibility for the Giants. So again, if you're looking to kind of stack bodies at the position, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself with guys that can only do one thing, right? You want them to be multiple and athletic and kind of be able to be placed up and down the front, because you do have that middle piece in Dexter Lawrence, right? You know that he ain't going anywhere, right? So if you can keep him there, you can kind of operate around him. Those are a couple guys that would make sense to me that we currently have, again, that can kind of provide some depth up front, kind of more as that defensive tackle, quote unquote, not a nose, but not a 4-3 defensive end body either.
Right. And the last position I want to ask you about, I won't break it down into cornerback and safety. We'll just say defensive back. Obviously, it's another position where the Giants have Tyler Nubin, who looks like he's going to be a really good player. If he can ever start to find the football like he did at Minnesota. But, they have Tay Banks, who I don't know which direction Tay's career is going to go in. There's questions about Tay. Drew Phillips is a really nice player. But aside from those three guys, the Giants could really use some young talent in the pipeline in the defensive backfield. So just again, give me a couple of guys to pay attention to.
For sure. Well, I think the low-hanging fruit, so we will have Siobhan Revelle, the corner from East Carolina, is at the game. He will be interview only, obviously tore his ACL in September, but I think that's another kid who has a huge opportunity to speak with these teams. And depending on how brazen some of these teams are about drafting a defensive back coming off an ACL in the first round, you get to the top of the second round. If you're able to nab Siobhan Revelle, I think that's a huge steal. Along with him, there's a couple guys I think. I'm going to go with Elijah Huzzy, is a kid that transferred from East Tennessee State to North Carolina 2 years ago. So this was his second year in North Carolina, and he's a kid who's really done a little bit of everything. At East Tennessee State, he was their boundary corner, right? He was their guy. You kind of can roll coverage away from, because he was going to be their dude to shut down the other team's best receiver. Initially, once he got to North Carolina, he played in the nickel, right? Because he's not the biggest guy. He's probably 5'10" or 5'11". And in the ACC, they had some guys that could kind of be more of those taller body types. And he played in the slot. He's played safety at times, has punt return experience as well. And then this year, he mostly was back to playing outside for North Carolina. So I think he's a guy that he's an older prospect, but he provides a ton of versatility. And I think that the biggest thing is not only has he played multiple roles, but he's done them well, right? There's something to be said about well, do you play a lot of things because you're good at a lot of things, or do you play a lot of things because you're not very good at any of them, right? And so
Mhm.
he's a kid who I think would for a team again that's maybe looking to kind of add multiple bodies to a position, I think he can kind of be a fixer and adjuster and line up at multiple spots. And I'll give two quick ones. Um, Talking about bigger, longer corners, right? I think every team uh, would prefer that every corner they have is probably 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", if they were good enough to do it, right? So in a couple of guys that we have, Isis Waxter from Villanova is a small school kid who's a big 6'2", 205-pound corner, really willing and run support, and a guy who has the opportunity to kind of to show himself all week against higher level competition, right? Good competition in the CAA over there and in FCS, but it'd be a good opportunity for him that in that aspect, as well as Zay Frazier. It's a kid from Texas, San Antonio. He's a 6'4" corner who really has good recovery speed. I wouldn't say that he's an absolute burner, but with those long strides, he covers up ground. This is a good opportunity for him to show a lot of those bigger, taller corners can struggle with transitions, right? Just simply put, the legs are longer. It takes longer for those to change direction and to really kind of redirect. And so that's a good opportunity for him. He's fairly new to the position. And when you see him on film, he does look a little raw or unrefined. But obviously tools galore. And at 6'4", you see, in that division, you got AJ Brown. You got some of these bigger receivers. In the NFC itself, Drake London and all these guys, these big 6'5" guys. If you have a kid like that and he hits, now all of a sudden you have one of those erasers to where you just have him trail him around, right? So, Safe Frazier is another guy, and then at safety, I will go with someone who's worn a lot of hats. He's playing for the national championship game here pretty soon. But Jordan Clark, the son of Ryan Clark, is a kid who plays a little bit of everything for Notre Dame, and obviously growing up has had the ability and had that resource of a father who was a decade-long NFL player. So not only do you know that he knows the game mentally, but also that how he knows how to conduct himself, right, and be a professional. And my dad did this for 12 years, right? So
Right.
I'm not going to make the mistakes that some kids will make off the field, or can kind of help expedite that process to help an NFL team by just again knowing film study and how to conduct himself as a professional. So those are a few names I'm excited to have in Frisco, and obviously don't mean to leave everyone out, but a lot of talented kids. But those are just a couple that that are going to provide a lot of intrigue and optimism heading into the game, and obviously with New York, it's unfortunately have been in draft mode for quite a while. And so just some more names to kind of freshen up on and prepare yourself as we head into this all-star season. It is a very exciting season and part of the year. I think it's obviously all these kids have had excellent college careers, right? And that's how they get here. But I think it's really exciting because now like you truly are on the precipice of being an NFL player, right? You're going to meet with all 32 teams. You're going to be practicing in front of all 32 teams. You're going to be playing with future NFL guys and kind of learning how the game is played at that level. And like I said, it's a really fun deal. And honestly, a lot of our guys that you see them, whether it's down at O-line masterminds or you'll see them at the combine or whatever the case may be. A lot of the kids, you'll say, like, well, what was your favorite part of the week? And the fun part is for a lot of our guys, it's that Wednesday media day.
Mhm.
Whether it's you're racing a Shriners patient in a wheelchair, or you're playing catch or tag, whatever it may be. It's a really fun experience for our guys to get to do that. And a lot of it's one of the bigger complaints is too, like, well, I wish we had more time with the kids, right? It was only an
Mhm.
hour, right? Whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So it's a fun experience, and it's a fun time of the year. And obviously, being from in Wisconsin, I'm always happy to leave during January to head down to Texas for some better weather. But again, it's for a great cause, and we've got great kids as far as being down there. They're always super energetic, right? And obviously extremely excited and ambitious and ready to roll. And so getting through the dog days of winter always a little better with some football and kind of helping these kids get to the next step in their professional career.
Absolutely, Owen. You've given me plenty of homework here, and you've provided a lot of good information for Giants fans. So I appreciate that, and maybe we'll do it again here sometime before the draft, or maybe even after the draft if a couple of these Shrine Game players land with the Giants. So we'll look forward to that. And maybe we'll have to hit the steakhouse again in Indy sometime.
That sounds wonderful. It's turned into a yearly tradition, and it's very anticipated.
Yes.
Not very often, as you get into adulthood, can you truly could throw your diet and your discretion by the wayside. But that's one of the few times of the year where you're able to do it, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. So would
Yeah.
love to. Ed.
Pro tip for the Brazilian steakhouse rookies: skip the salad bar.
Yep,
skip,
save
just
room. No, yeah,
skip the salad bar.
you're gonna need
All
it. Save
right.
room.
Owen, thank you very, very much. Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.